우리가 그냥 일상적인 어떤 말이 감동적인 언어로 옮겨가는 그 좌표를 찍어주는 게 작가의 어떤 역할이라는 생각을 많이 해요. 예를 들면 황석영 작가의 산포 가는 길에서 내 본명은 이점례요라고 고백하는, 뭐 그냥 평상시에는 아무 말도 아니지만 그게 그 소설 안에서 이야기를 얹고 발화되었을 때는 감동적인 그런 어떤 말이 되는 것처럼요. 결국은 소설이란 건 사람과 사람, 사연과 사연, 또 인생과 인생이 이렇게 만나가지고 발생하는 건데, 저는 그 국면들, 두 세계가 만나는 국면들을 잡아내려고 애를 쓰는 것 같아요. 그런 자리에 가서 우리는 똑같이 훼손된 대지에서 살아가는 사람들끼리 같은 처지라는 것을 확인하는 게 저는 항상 재밌었고, 해외 독자들은 저를 통해서 한국을 이렇게 이해해 보려고 하는 것 같은 느낌을 받았을 때 굉장히 부담스러워요. 작가는 그럴 때 굉장히 곤혹스럽기도 하고, 또 그 곤혹스러움이 자극인 것 같기도 해요. 벌써 30년이 됐구나. 뭐 해놓은 거 없이 방학이 끝나는 느낌? 그런 느낌이 들어요. 참 쓰고 싶은 이야기도 많고 좀 많이 쓰고 싶은데 그렇게 아주 열심히 쓰지 못했다라는 생각이 들어요. 그래서 아주 시원하게 한번 쉬어보지도 못했다라는 생각도 들고 그렇습니다. 앞으로 뭐 할 수 있는 데까지 열심히 써야죠. 그리고 한번 푹 쉬어보게요.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, June 17th, here in South Korea. Upon arrival in Canada, President Lee Jae-myung dove right into his sideline diplomatic engagements, sitting down separately with his counterparts from South Africa and Australia. Staying in Canada, US President Donald Trump made an early exit from the Group of Seven gathering, citing the escalating tensions in the Middle East as Israel and Iran continue to trade fire. And speaking of the situation in the Middle East, an Israeli airstrike hit an Iranian state-run broadcaster during a live newscast, forcing the female anchor to flee from the desk. We begin with dramatic footage from the Iranian state-run broadcaster as its female anchor was forced to flee from set following an Israeli air assault during a live newscast. Our Lee Seung-jae starts us off.
The Israeli military launched an airstrike against Iran's state-run broadcaster IRIB on Monday after it issued a warning for Tehran's District 3, where the broadcaster is located.
آنچه که ملاحظه کردید، صدایی که شنیدید، فضای غبارآلود استادیوم.
Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the attack, saying that the Iranian propaganda and incitement mouthpiece is on its way to disappear. Iran's foreign ministry quickly condemned the attack, calling it a wicked act that constitutes a war crime, as it targeted journalists. Meanwhile, in an ABC News interview aired on Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he believes killing Iran's supreme leader would end the conflict between Israel and Iran. Netanyahu said Ali Khamenei tweeted almost every day, "Death to Israel." ABC anchor Jonathan Karl quickly asked if Israel was going to target the supreme leader, to which the Israeli leader said that they're doing what needs to be done, but did not go into details. Netanyahu added that such action would not escalate tensions, instead end them. In the meantime, the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier was rerouted from the South China Sea to the Middle East on Monday, meaning the U.S. will have 2 aircraft carriers in the region. Dozens of Air Force refueling aircraft also left U.S. bases over the weekend for Europe, a move seen as a preventive measure to support any operation in the Middle East. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In related news, the Group of 7 over in Canada is blaming Iran and its pursuit of nuclear weapons for the latest military confrontation in the Middle East. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more.
The Group of 7 leaders have urged Iran for a de-escalation in the Middle East, showing unified support for Israel. Through the joint statement issued on Monday local time, and while saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, the leaders condemned Iran for being the principal source of regional instability and terror, and highlighted that Iran can never have nuclear weapons. De-escalation was not the only topic for the G7 leaders. Citing risk to global economic stability, the leaders pushed for U.S. President Donald Trump to ease off the trade war. As the U.S. plans to impose even steeper tariffs on countries across the world, they argued that such a dispute would only weaken G7 economies and rather strengthen China. The countries did use the summit as a chance to reach a trade agreement with the U.S. Before his abrupt departure, U.S. President Donald Trump held talks with G7 leaders, and the United Kingdom was able to sign a trade deal. The agreement sets the tax on British autos at 10% from the end of the month, down from the current 27.5%, up to a quota of 100,000 vehicles a year, and removes U.S. tariffs on UK aerospace products.
Thank you very much. This now implements on car tariffs and aerospace, our really important agreement, and so this is a very good day for both of our countries, a real sign of strength.
A final agreement to cut the tax on British steel to zero has not yet been reached. Meanwhile, other countries could not see breakthroughs. But following talks between Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Trump, the Canadian government indicated that there could be a trade agreement within 30 days. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba reportedly discussed a solution that aligns with Japan's national interests during a 30-minute conversation with President Trump, but said there still are existing differences that needed to be worked out. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Also in Canada, upon arrival there on Monday, President Lee Jae-myung sat down separately with his counterparts from South Africa and Australia ahead of the extended G7 session on Tuesday local time. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min is part of the traveling press corps and files this report from Calgary.
On his way to Canada to attend the G7 summit, South Korea's new president Lee Jae-myung was asked about the timing of the G7 summit during an impromptu press conference on board Korea's Air Force One.
지금 취임한 지 며칠 되지 않아서 국제회의에 참석하는 건 우리가 있는 게 분명합니다. 이 국제사회에 대한민국이 신속하게 정상화됐다는 것을 좀 보여주는 게 필요하다라는 의견도 있었고.
By that, he meant filling the leadership vacuum following the martial law incident. The president started off his resumption of summit diplomacy by holding bilateral meetings with invited non-G7 countries, South Africa and Australia, on his first day in Canada. President Lee met South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese separately, and in those meetings, he addressed cooperation on the economy and energy, building upon friendships dating back to the Korean War over 7 decades ago. Also addressed was regional security surrounding the Korean Peninsula. He also invited Albanese to the APEC summit in Korea, while Ramaphosa invited Yi to the G20 summit in South Africa later this year. In the evening, President Yi and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung were hosted by Canada for dinner. Also in the South Korean president's mind for this trip was trade with the U.S., but his expected meeting with President Trump fell through as the American leader cut short his trip to the G7, citing the crisis in the Middle East.
The U.S. side contacted us, asking for our understanding for what has happened.
President Yi's summit with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is slated for Tuesday, local time.
Earlier on board the Air Force One, President Yi did note that he seeks to yield results that are mutually beneficial when it comes to trade talks with the U.S. The Trump administration's deadline for tariff negotiations is set for early July. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Calgary.
Meanwhile, in other news, despite expectations that the benchmark KOSPI would soar past the 3,000 mark in its session today, it closed trade just below that level. Park Jun-an has the closing numbers.
South Korea's benchmark KOSPI ended trading on Tuesday at 2,950.3 points. This marks a 0.12% increase from Monday's market close. The stocks that drove market momentum were South Korea's tech giants, Samsung Electronics and SK hynix. As of 2:15 p.m., Samsung Electronics, which makes up about 12.4% of the benchmark index, climbed 2.7% to 58,901. While SK hynix, accounting for around 6.5% of the market, briefly hit an all-time high of 260,000 won before slipping to 250,000 won.
The index recently had already moved up while semiconductor stocks lagged. But as AI demand continues to grow, a positive outlook for chip stocks is being rebuilt, particularly around SK hynix, which remains competitive in AI-related memory products, especially high-bandwidth memory.
With the KOSPI now at a critical turning point, shifting from the current 2,000 level toward the 3,000 mark, both domestic and global investors are closely monitoring the situation to see whether it can break through and sustain a position above 3,000. Although South Korean stocks have gained momentum to bounce back from early April's yearly low, there are global uncertainties that could bring volatility to the market. The Middle Eastern conflicts between Israel and Iran could significantly impact global stocks and oil prices if the situation escalates. Moreover, on Wednesday local time, the U.S. Federal Reserve will make a decision on the country's interest rate. Although the market is expecting interest rates to remain unchanged, Fed Chair Jerome Powell's forecast about the country's economy could affect not only the U.S. stock markets, but also South Korean stocks. On the domestic front, as the Lee Jae-myung administration prepares a supplementary budget worth around 20 trillion won, or about $14.6 billion, the stock market could experience volatility depending on the scope, funding sources, and market expectations surrounding the plan. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Korea's overseas shipments of automobiles lost ground in May, and trade officials here are linking the decline to a number of factors. Our Moon Ji-young reports.
South Korea's car exports shrank last month as outbound shipments to the U.S. sharply dropped on Washington's hefty tariff on imported vehicles. That's according to the latest automotive trend report released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, which showed the country's auto exports came at $6.2 billion, down over 4% from a year earlier. The figure marks the second consecutive month of decreases, but is the second highest export value for any May. In terms of volume, exports fell by more than 3% on year. However, exports of eco-friendly vehicles went up more than 10% to record a new monthly high thanks to strong demand for hybrid cars. The Trade Ministry attributed the overall decrease in auto exports to a base effect from a record monthly figure posted a year earlier and the impacts of the Trump administration's 25% tariff on all imported cars and auto parts. Exports to the U.S. decreased by more than 27% on year in May. The ministry further explained that this decrease appears to have been influenced by the start of mass local production at Hyundai Motor Group's Meta Plant America in the U.S. state of Georgia. Meanwhile, here at home, Sales of eco-friendly cars have increased by 39% from the previous year and now exceeds sales of gasoline-powered cars for the first time ever. This is driven by strong demand for hybrid cars, with sales rising more than 31% year-on-year, as well as EVs and plug-in hybrids. In terms of domestic production, South Korean car makers produced 3.1% fewer vehicles compared to the previous year, recording 359,000 units due to decreased exports. 문지영, Arirang News.
The Japanese embassy here in Seoul hosted a reception Monday evening to celebrate 6 decades of diplomatic relations between South Korea and Japan this year. Now, a similar event is scheduled to be hosted by the Korean embassy in Tokyo on Thursday. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
From historic highs and lows, South Korea and Japan are pledging to move forward, hand in hand towards a better future. That was the message from President Lee Jae-myung and senior diplomats as both nations marked 60 years since normalizing bilateral relations. On Monday, the Japanese embassy in Seoul hosted the reception to mark the milestone, reflecting on the 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations, signed 20 years after Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule at the end of World War II. They also agreed on economic cooperation and a claim settlement, under which Japan provided $300 million in grants and $200 million in loans over 10 years. Over the past 6 decades, annual trade between the two neighbors has surged from just $200 million to around $70 billion last year, a 350-fold increase. And people traveling between the two countries, numbering around 10,000 in 1965, has now surpassed 12 million a year. But history remains a sensitive fault line. Japan's wartime forced labour, its sexual enslavement of so-called comfort women, and territorial disputes have long fueled friction, which spiralled in 2019 into a full-blown diplomatic and trade standoff. The Yoon Suk-yeol government moved to mend ties, restoring reciprocal visits between the leaders and strengthening trilateral cooperation with the United States. President Lee Jae-myung has signalled continued engagement, speaking via video due to his trip to Canada to attend the G7 summit.
격변하는 국제 정세 속에서 우리 양국은 함께 대응 방안을 모색해야 하는 중요한 파트너입니다.
Japan's ambassador Mitsushima Koichi said the two nations should now build new momentum for the decades ahead and emphasize the importance of trilateral ties with the US. Japan's special advisor to the Prime Minister, Nagashima Akihisa, who also heads the Japan-Korea Parliamentarians Union, called for broader cooperation.
Expanding bilateral communication and cooperation is no longer a choice, but a necessity. This applies across various sectors, including security, economy, energy, technology, and culture.
The commemorations will continue on Thursday in Tokyo, where Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is set to attend a corresponding reception hosted by the Korean embassy. But first, President Lee and Prime Minister Ishiba could well hold their first meeting on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Today, that is June 17th, is the final day of a relatively early summer festival in the city of Gimpo, just ahead of the heavy rain forecast for this coming weekend here in the Greater Seoul area. Our Pyun Ye-young was there.
This summer is forecast to be hotter than usual. Heavy rainfall is expected to start in June. And what better way to make most of the sweltering heat and rain than water sports?
Here at the Gimpo Aramarine Festival, visitors can kayak, slide down water slides, and splash the heat away.
Following its roaring success over the past years, the Gimpo Aramarine Festival came back this year, this time running for 4 days. The festival centers on the theme of connecting water and the environment with culture.
This year marks the 9th edition of the Gimpo Aramarine Festival. Our main programs include the Pori Race, various water leisure activities, and a yacht competition. We're doing our best to offer fun and exciting experiences not only for Gimpo residents, but for visitors from all over.
Running from June 14th to 17th, the event offers more than just water sports. A dance competition and live performances by popular artists add to the energy and excitement. Visitors can also explore community partnership booths, offering hands-on experiences linked to water and sustainability.
Oh, we heard there are lots of fun activities for kids to enjoy here, so we decided to come.
At the carbon-neutral wooden play experience booth, children play with eco-friendly wooden toys while learning about carbon neutrality. And one charming star stole the show, the festival's duck mascot, Pori. Gimpo has a unique tradition of using ducks in rice farming to control pests, an eco-friendly practice that inspired the city's lovable duck mascot. On Sunday, the ducks made a splashy return in the annual rubber duck race, now with the brand new name, Pori Race. The name Pori is a playful blend of Gimpo and ori, the Korean word for duck, and was selected through a public naming contest. With rubber ducks raining from the sky, the Pori Race once again filled the city with smiles and laughter. According to officials, an estimated 80,000 visitors attended the festival over the weekend. 변예영, Arirang News.
Korean researchers have advanced the accuracy of wearable healthcare gadgets aimed at monitoring blood pressure. Our Jin explains.
Monitoring blood pressure as part of personal health care has become even more important, as cardiovascular diseases like stroke or heart failure are the leading cause of global death. However, existing healthcare devices for blood pressure monitoring are cumbersome or inconvenient to use. Some smartwatches that aid in health monitoring can measure heart rate by detecting changes in blood volume. But the use of optical sensors limits their accuracy for it to meet the standards of a healthcare device. LED-based photoplethysmography, or PPG technology, only uses between 1 and 4 LEDs in its sensors. Now, a research team from the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology has developed a highly sensitive, wearable, piezoelectric blood pressure sensor that utilizes up to 50 LEDs, making it much more sensitive, therefore significantly improving its accuracy.
By maintaining a higher spectral resolution, more signals can be emitted in a tighter and smaller wavelength range. With extensively more wavelengths measured at the same time, even when there is distortion, high accuracy can be guaranteed.
Ultra-thin piezoelectric sensors with a thickness of several micrometers, which is thinner than human hair, remain in conformal contact with the skin, allowing for the successful collection of accurate blood pressure from the subtle pulsation of the blood vessels.
Blood pressure levels can be measured not only during workouts, but in daily life, and even while sleeping. Because the spectroscope was made very small, it can easily be applied to wearable devices.
Continuous monitoring of blood pressure changes can help prevent cardiovascular-related diseases. The research team plans to develop a wireless blood pressure measuring device through follow-up research and to commercialize it before too long. Jin, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, heavy weekend rains in the capital Kinshasa have triggered floods and landslides that have claimed at least 29 lives. Kinshasa Governor Daniel Bumba said on Sunday local time that sudden downpours, unusually heavy for the dry season, dumped nearly 90 millimeters of rain across the city on Saturday. Drone footage on Monday showed the devastation as the storm overwhelmed drainage systems and walls. Roads and bridges have been swept away and many neighborhoods saw power outages. Rescues are underway with affected residents relocated to temporary shelters. Kinshasa lies on the Congo River and many residents live in areas vulnerable to flooding. More than 30 people died in Kinshasa in April, also due to flash floods. Denmark has launched a trial of uncrewed robotic sail drones, nicknamed Voyagers, to enhance maritime surveillance across the Baltic and North Seas. Two of the Voyagers, built by California-based company Saildrone, were deployed by Denmark's armed forces on Monday from the port of Cage, south of the capital, Copenhagen. The 10-meter-long unmanned surface drones, which resemble ordinary sailboats, are powered by wind and solar energy and are equipped with radar, optical, and infrared cameras, as well as sonar and acoustic sensors for monitoring purposes. They're set to patrol Danish and NATO waters autonomously for 3 months. Their operation follows testing in early June when 2 Voyagers joined NATO's maritime patrols. Saildrone's founder and CEO said the vessels provide a full picture of what's above and below the surface, to about 30 to 50 kilometers in the open ocean. The Trump Organization, led by U.S. President Donald Trump's 2 sons, unveiled a new mobile network named Trump Mobile on Monday. The service launches on the 10th anniversary of Trump's presidential campaign announcement. It is priced at $47 45 cents per month, symbolically referencing Trump's positions as the 45th and 47th president. The offering includes the T1 phone, a gold-hued Android smartphone, priced at $499, made in the U.S., targeting conservative consumers seeking an American-made alternative. The phone is set for release in August or September. The 2025 Paris Air Show kicked off at the Le Bourget Airport on Monday local time, displaying various civilian and military aerial vehicles. However, France has ordered the closure of 4 major Israeli defense companies' stands after exhibitors refused to stop displaying attack weapons, citing the escalation in the Gaza conflict. Israeli President Isaac Herzog condemned it as outrageous and unprecedented, accusing Paris of politically motivated discrimination. He went on to compare the blacked-out booths to a Jewish ghetto. The Paris Air Show will open to the public until June 20th. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Unlike yesterday, we'll get hotter and hotter from today. Today's daytime temperature in Seoul rose to up to 29 degrees Celsius, which is about 4 degrees higher than yesterday. As heat with humid air comes in, it will rise to 31 degrees tomorrow, and it feels even hotter than the actual readings across the country. With summer heat, the ultraviolet index is also strong from the morning. It will start at high to very high levels in the morning, then soar to very high levels all over the country in the afternoon. Please stay out of the sunshine when it gets to its peak. Tomorrow morning will start warming around 20 to 21 degrees in most parts of the country. Highs will move up to 32 degrees in Gwangju, 26 degrees in Busan. Rain is expected from Thursday night for central parts of the country and western parts of Jeollabuk-do province. Then it will spread nationwide on Friday and Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour. Thank you for watching. Coming up next is our daily panel session.
제주특별자치도가 6차 4.3 희생자 보상금 신청을 2025년 1월 2일부터 2026년 12월 31일까지 받습니다. 신청 대상은 본인 및 민법상 상속권자가 가능하며 제주도 내 읍면동 주민센터로 방문 접수 혹은 도청 4.3 지원과 보상팀으로 우편 접수하시면 됩니다. 또한 4.3위원회 심의 결정 이후 보상금 결정서를 통지받으신 분들은 청구 서류를 제출하시면 됩니다. 자세한 사항은 제주도청 064-710-8450으로 문의하시거나 4.3 종합정보시스템 홈페이지 콘텐츠에서 확인하세요.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors, grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here. Add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
A country where traditional and modern cultures coexist.
Where you can explore spectacular landscapes and nature.
Savor the delights of traveling at every turn.
Where? Korea, of course.
There are some must-visit places in Korea. Ones that appear in every tour guidebook: Hangang River, Gyeongbokgung Palace from the Joseon Dynasty, and...
Yes, these are essentials, but I want to go somewhere a little different. I don't have to follow the guidebook. For example, filming locations for K-pop music videos or K-dramas and movies.
Traveling is all about taking it slow. A long walk at your own pace, or even zoning out somewhere quiet. Doesn't it sound relaxing?
You travel for the experience, trying something new in a foreign place, de-stressing and making lifetime memories, taking tons of pictures along the way.
70% of the Korean territory is mountainous. Naturally, hiking is a very popular pastime in Korea. Not your kind of activity? Trust me, the view will make the effort worth it. Just catch your breath by the cold stream in the valley.
Korea is surrounded by the sea on three sides. From the beach, you can enjoy a wide open view as well as various water activities. But the riverside is great too. There's plenty to see and do.
If you're in Korea, you can't miss the night view full of dazzling lights.
Yes, even the same place can have a totally different vibe at night.
Want to make unforgettable memories?
How about traveling to all corners of Korea? Join us next time to explore more about Korean culture.
Upon arrival in Canada, President Lee Jae-myung dove right into his sideline diplomatic engagements, sitting down separately with his counterparts from South Africa and Australia. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective for June 17th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. President Lee Jae-myung is in Canada for the extended Group of 7 session, during which artificial intelligence and energy supply chains will be addressed. For more on this session, as well as the Press and Sideline Summits, I have Chloe Bognon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio. Chloe, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I also have freelance journalist Yang Chen-hao from Taiwan, currently based here in Seoul with us. Chen-hao, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, glad to be here.
Chloe, upon arrival in Canada for the extended G7 session, President Lee Jae-myung sat down separately with his counterparts from South Africa and Australia. Let's begin with details from those bilateral engagements.
Yeah, so he decided to, that was known on the program, that yesterday would be bilateral engagement with countries that are not member of the G7 and that were also invited, just like South Korea. And today we're supposed to be, we'll talk a bit more about that later on, but we're supposed to be bilateral and trilateral talks with the member of the G7. He spoke mostly, so with South Africa, he was speaking mostly about economical partnerships and trying to, you know, renew the links that have been kind of severed in the last 6 months because diplomacy was kind of at a stop in South Korea. With Australia, he talked mostly about sorry, I'm searching in my notes again. Yeah, he was speaking about the North Korean nuclear threat, sorry about that, with Australia. So that was more on the security side, which is also one of the main points of main theme that is to be developed in this G7 summit. It was peace and security that's supposed to be discussed. So the other thing that were supposed to be done for the first diplomatic steps of President Lee Jae-myung were supposed to meet with Donald Trump. Unfortunately, President Trump had to leave earlier. He explained that yesterday night he was going to leave. So we know now that this bilateral meeting is not going to happen this time. We don't know yet who the President Lee Jae-myung is going to meet today. They will talk about meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. That could have been a trilateral talks because obviously the three allies are quite close and there is a need for Lee Jae-myung to be able to meet the two counterparts in the US and Japan. It will also be a way for him to show South Korean trustworthiness on the diplomatic scene. Lee Jae-myung, during the campaign, has been speaking about pragmatic diplomacy. That was the kind of thing that you know, has been discussed and maybe a bit critiqued by pundits. And so there is a need to show also that the Korean democracy, and I'm going to quote there the presidential office, that the fact that the Korean democracy has survived the crisis posed by the martial law declaration. So to show that Korea is back and is a trustworthy partner and that the other countries can come back to discussing and making partnerships with South Korea.
Right, and staying with President Lee Jae-myung's agenda at the G7, during the extended G7 meeting, he will partake in talks on AI and clean energy. What more can you share with us about that particular agenda?
So in the previous broadcast, we've mentioned that President Lee has been focusing and emphasizing his plans and goals of strengthening South Korea's ability on developing and using the AI, also hoping to boost the economy, especially the rural area, through developing clean and renewable energy. That's what we have discussed after he's been elected. And as we know so far, that President Lee is scheduled to speak maybe twice on the topics of diversifying the energy supply chain and integrating AI with energy systems. And in the future, we might see that the new government might increasing more spending on developing AI techniques and also cultivating relevant talents and probably trying to find a more clear connection and plan to connect AI, clean energy, and economic development all together, also strengthening cooperations with United States and the European Union in the same field. Since it's a majority government now for President Lee, with the Democratic Party controlling the National Assembly, pushing related legislation and putting more budget on such fields will be way more easy now. But challenges do exist. It's not going to be that easy, especially when dealing with energy. I'm going to talk more about it, having details later.
Right, indeed. Chloe, in recent years, such talks like such multilateral platforms involving global leaders have also taken up the topic of sustainable economic advances. That being said, often linking that, of course, to climate action. What are your prospects with regard to talk on climate action, especially keeping in mind Mr. Trump's rejection of climate science, if you will?
Yeah, so in this G7, because it's happening in Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister decided that there should be a discussion to improve joint responses to wildfires. So wildfires is a very impactful and strong consequences of climate change. It has been impacting all the countries that are currently working at the G7. I'm speaking especially here in South Korea. We had recently very strong and devastating, dramatic wildfires. So this was to be discussed yesterday. It's an important topic also for the Prime Minister, the Canadian Prime Minister. And it's interesting to see some of the Canadian medias, especially like the Calgary Herald, has been saying that it's interesting to see that the G7 leaders, when discussing climate change, chose the end-on approach to speak about a very specific topic with the US and the US of Donald Trump especially, rather than going on climate change subject. They decided to speak about wildfires and not about the general theme, because we do know that Donald Trump is a climate change skeptic. He has been choosing to go on anti-climate improvement measures. I'm thinking, for example, withdrawing the US from the Paris Agreement. He done it for his first mandate. He just done it again on this second mandate. So that is a very strong message from him, saying that it's not climate change for him is not the most important thing. And we can, for example, see on May 22, the G7 head of finance gathered, and in their common joint declaration, there were no mention of climate change. And that's something that has to be seen. So in my opinion, I would say, because there is this need to make sure that the US will sign the final declaration, we cannot expect much to be done. And the problem is with climate change, lots should be done. So it might be not enough, and the US has to be included in any measures, because they are anyway one of the biggest greenhouse gases producers. So if they're not there, most of the plans are not going to work anyway.
Right. Meanwhile, Chen-Hao, Bloomberg recently published an article about President Lee Jae-myung's role in advancing Korea's policy with regard to the environment. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I will need to point out first one thing which many people might not know, that the Korea Electric Power Corporation, the KEPCO, is indeed in a very critical situation now. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, the KEPCO had been running deficits for 3 consecutive years, only returning to profitability last year. However, it's still carrying a massive debt of 34.7 trillion won, which is really huge amount. And KEPCO relies too much on the subsidies from the government, but meanwhile, it has made little effort to invest in renewable or clean energy recent years. As a result, South Korea's renewable energy infrastructure and development remain significantly in a very, very low level. So when talking about renewable energy, we always think of for example, solar or wind energy, right? But due to South Korea's geographical limitations, as we know that there are so many mountains, and even in the plains, it is so densely populated, so many people. So there is limited land available for building solar or wind power facilities indeed. And during President Moon Jae-in's period, his term, facing the influx of low-cost Chinese equipment threatening South Korean manufacturers, indeed the South Korean government introduced a tracking and certification system requiring the domestic solar developers to verify the carbon footprint of solar panels throughout their supply chains. This policy leads South Korea's solar module prices become the highest in the world, making solar energy investment become more difficult. Nobody want to invest it on that. Also, when we always think that the eastern area of South Korea is generally considered as an ideal area for developing renewable energy. However, during President Yoon Suk-yeol's period, the government restricted the issuance of power generation permits in the region until 2032, citing the need to upgrade local substations. So this has resulted in 60% of the South Korea's electricity, 60% still coming from fossil fuels. So President Lee Jae-myung now faces an extremely daunting or very difficult challenge. He must replan and invest in renewable energy infrastructure and effort that usually have no immediate results and often takes decades to bear fruit. Moreover, renewable energy requires high upfront costs, making it politically unrewarding. However, if President Lee fails to act swiftly, fails to act faster, it will become even more difficult for South Korea to develop renewable energy in the future. South Korea will grow incredibly dependent on fossil fuels and nuclear power. Both will cause heavy burden on the environment. So the country would also miss the key opportunity or the key chance to use renewable energy as a tool to improve its economic structure.
Right. Well, perhaps fully aware of ththese challenges, Chloe, President Lee Jae-myung has spoken about setting up a new ministry, so-called the Climate Energy Ministry. Now, I understand the French government itself has been quite active with regard to addressing climate concerns and advancing clean energy. The Environment Ministry in France, I believe, was named the Ecological Transition Ministry back in the year 2020. And then just last year, the name was made even longer. Could you tell us a bit more about this particular ministry and the achievements it's marked thus far?
Yeah, sure. So to get the full name just once, because we don't have enough time to use it all the time, it's not the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Energy, Climate and Risk Prevention. So just to speak about the name, because in France it's the decision of the Prime Minister and the President to choose the names of the ministers and choose their level in the protocolar order. So that's always say something. So the fact that they changed the name shows that they want to reflect the importance of taking into account climate change, but also risk prevention. Once again, we're coming back to the first question on wildfires. So showing that there is a link between climate change, the need for transition in ecology, and the risk that are happening in all of different ways. France is not touched that much by wildfires, but there are other big meteorological events that happen and that are quite strong for France. For example, floods do happen a lot as well. So this is interesting to see that this ministry in general, let's not speak about the very specific long one now, but in the recent years, there have been a betterment of air quality in France. So they've been trying to work. They've been also working on a stronger norm on overfishing in the French waters. For the most part of the politics on environment, it's true that because we're part of the European Union, a lot of things are coming from the European Union and then implemented in France. France is unfortunately still a bit slow in some effects. They're just beginning of this week, France has shown a new plan to try to reduce the quantity of plastic waste. We are one of the last in the European Union, so there are still things to be made. I feel like this is something that is seen and taken in account by this Ministry of Ecological Transition. But I would say, in reality, there has been a downgrade in the question of ecological transition in France, at least if we take just for the 2 mandates of President Emmanuel Macron. When he started in 2017, the Ministry of Environment at the time was number 2 in the protocolar order in the government. So it was quite a strong position for the first days of the mandate. Currently, the new minister is number 12. So it has been downgrading. Obviously, because there is a downgrade, there's also a downgrade in budget. So there is this idea that maybe the government is not taking that much attention into the environment, but I would say it's probably reflective of the global state of the world. Again, coming back to the G7 summit, I feel like, unfortunately, right now, because of all that's going on in the geopolitical order, I feel like ecology is the part that is suffering the most because the attention is going to something else, and that could be peace, that could be stability, that could be economy. So obviously the focus cannot be on everything at once. I do feel that in a lot of countries, this is environment and ecology is the one who's taking the most, like losing the focus.
Right. And back with regard to the Group of Seven summit over in Canada, Jianhao, there's been quite a bit of talk about expanding the membership of the Group of Seven to include countries like South Korea and even Australia. What's the latest on that front?
Remember, it used to be G8, right? But Russia was being excluded 2014 after invaded the Crimea. And South Korea, though, had been invited into the expand G7 session several times, but also still not an official member till now. And when talking about G7, there are United States and United Kingdom and Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Japan is the only Asian country among the G7. And indeed, recently, there are some scholars and even think tanks suggesting that the membership of G7 should be reconsidered, perhaps by including countries like you mentioned, Australia or even South Korea, and expanding it into maybe G9. Which could be an ideal plan. The influence of the current G7 countries is indeed going down. The total GDP of these seven countries used to charge 67% of the world's GDP in 1992, which has been the peak, but later it's like dropped year by year, and now it has become like 43% this year. So meanwhile, we can see that the growing power of China, with its own GDP charging 18% now. China has become a huge market, as we know, and the leading manufacturer which many countries are relying. As the global alliance and liberal democratic countries seeks to counter China, relying solely on the current G7 may no longer be sufficient anymore. Some countries outside the G7 have indeed already surpassed existing members in terms of industrial development or technological capabilities and economic performance. This all has led to growing discussions about whether to replace certain members or expand the group, make it bigger to include additional nations. South Korea, for instance, possesses advanced semiconductor and AI technologies, and is also the very major exporter of automobiles. And its per capita GDP has even surpassed that of Japan recently. And as a result, some argue that South Korea should be included into the group. And despite such proposals gaining traction, turning them into the reality might be very difficult, largely because they challenge the vested interest of the current G7 members, particularly Japan. And moreover, as the number of member states increases, the costs and the complexity of negotiations or having dialogues might be more. It might take more longer time and become more complicated. Something the existing members are likely reluctant to face.
Right, Chloe. A week from today, that will be next Tuesday, the annual NATO summit will take place in the Netherlands. Now, President Lee Jae-myung himself has yet to confirm whether or not he'll be attending that particular summit. What message might his presence or absence send to the rest of the world, do you think?
So I would say, first, NATO is more of a military cooperation. It's important to note that it's different from G7, and the message it might convey could be different from coming to the G7 summit, which President Lee Jae-myung decided to attend. Russia and China are all excluded of the NATO, so that means, once again, that it would be more on the United States and Western side of the current division that's kind of plaguing the world at the moment. So it's obviously all hypothetical, and I do feel that whether President Lee Jae-myung comes or not, it would not probably the message will not probably be too strongly seen. But I would say that in the current context of tension between China and the United States and the Russian war in Ukraine. If the president decides to come to NATO summit, it would be a message towards the United States and showing that there is really, as he was saying, the backbone of South Korean diplomacy is the alliance with the United States, because he also has been criticized, Lee Jae-myung, on the will he be close enough to the US? That's something that's been said against him in the campaign. So that would be a strong message going to that direction. But on the other way, not going, would it be seen as a soothing gesture toward China and Russia? This is maybe not that simple. Could also be a way for South Korea to show a bit of independence, deciding not to align themselves completely with the United States. And in the same time, going there to NATO summit will probably also be a way to finally get that bilateral meeting with Donald Trump that unfortunately could not happen at the G7 summit. I would say it would also depend on the message that will be officially conveyed by the presidential office, whether he decides to go or not.
Right, because he has yet to make his decision. Of course, it is yet to be announced, and what we're talking about right now is just speculation. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time. Chloe, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Shen Hao, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return with more panel discussion of the G7 summit, same time tomorrow. Join us then.